Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave. We'd love to hear where you think we got it right, where you think we don't know what the heck we're talking about. You can do that on unsilentpodcast.com, on our Rumble channel, or in various places on social media where people go to discuss calmly the issues of the day.
Discuss calmly. Where does that happen? Is that a thing now, Dave? Do we have a resurgence of discussing calmly?
But before we started, Brian, I told you I'm a glass half full kind of guy.
You did say that. That's true. I can confirm that you absolutely did. One interesting thing I think I'll start off with was the Department of Education forced UPenn's hand on the debate on what some would characterize as men and women's sports and others would characterize as women and women's sports, which I was watching I watched, I don't know, like 10 minutes of the news last night, which, is more color commentary than news for sure. But there was a woman, I don't know, I'm going to guess she's 40, 35, 40, somewhere there. And it made me think of you, Dave, because she said, imagine what it's going to be like in 20 years explaining to your children how we had to fight for 5 years to keep men out of women's sports. Now, that's her perspective, and I would tend to agree with that perspective, but that's how she characterized it. And I thought, well, it's kind of what Dave and I do.
Yeah, it's exactly
is try to explain this. But what I thought was interesting about this was, first of all, there was a decision, which it seems like for many of these things, just getting to some sort of decision is itself impossible.
Yeah.
But then the degree to which they made a decision, this is not what I have in front of me here, but I heard somebody say, I can't verify this, but I heard somebody say that UPenn is going to have to go as far as creating a description of what a woman is and what a man is using biological data. And I thought, wow, that is is massive, right? Now, how much that's true and how much that's speculation, I don't know. But and then so it occurs to me, like, that is absolutely massive that they're going to have to do that if it's true.
Yeah.
And then it's also massive that we have to do this.
Well, yeah, in 2025, when you would think that maybe some of these things had been settled for a millennia or two, about the differences between men and women.
Yeah. So anyhow, they have to restore female athletes, all individual UPenn swimming Division I swimming records, titles or similar recognitions that were, quote, misappropriated by male athletes allowed to compete in female categories. So they have to restore all the titles, accolades, records, all that kind of stuff have to go back to again, just for the simplicity of this conversation, I'm going to take the more conservative approach viewpoint on this, but they have to give them all back to the women that would have won otherwise.
Yep.
They have to issue a public statement to the university community stating it will comply with Title IX, specifying that UPenn will not allow males to compete in female athletic programs or occupy Penn Athletics female intimate spaces or facilities, meaning like locker rooms. Like you can't have somebody who's recently decided to switch teams in the locker room. This statement will specify that UPenn will adopt biology-based actually, it's right here. I overlooked it. This statement will specify that UPenn will adopt biology-based definitions for the words male and female pursuant to Title IX and consistent with President Trump's executive orders defending, the name of this, the orders were defending women from gender ideology extremism and keeping men out of women's sports. So they have to adopt biology-based definitions for the words male and female. I mean, can we overstate what a big deal that is here, Dave? I mean, can we overstate like what a massive tectonic shift that is from what we've been talking about for the last 5 years?
It is. At the same time, it reminds me of maybe a Saturday Night Live skit 30 years ago, right? I mean,
yeah,
it is a tectonic shift because we've been told for the last, 7 years, 5 years, whatever it is, that if we're not a PhD in biology, then we really don't have a valid opinion. We can't really say anything about what's a woman. I'm sorry, sir. I'm not a biologist. I'm only a Supreme Court justice or something. So I
Yeah,
mean,
the
on that
Supreme
level,
Court justice interviewing for the job said, "I'm not qualified to answer it." Who's a woman, by the way?
right? Yes, exactly.
Uh, I'm not qualified to answer what a woman is because I'm not a biologist. And my thought was always like, okay, well, I'm going to guess somewhere in your 40-year tenure, there's going to be a case involving women's rights. Are you going to recuse
You would
yourself from
think.
that case?
Yeah, you would think. I mean, well, and I don't know. I don't know if there was a follow-up question to that, but I mean, the follow-up question that popped into my mind was, well, what are you? And
Yeah,
how
my follow up question would have been, okay, when women's rights are at stake in a case you're presiding over, how will you make decisions then?
right, right, yeah, exactly. Well,
All right, so the next one is UPenn will post a statement at a prominent location on its main website and each of the websites for women's athletics. UPenn will rescind any guidance which violated Title IX, remove or revise any internal and public-facing statements or documents that are inconsistent with Title IX, and notify all staff and women's athletics of such rescissions. And they will send a personalized letter of apology to each impacted female swimmer.
yeah. Well,
So,
so Riley Gaines, she
yeah,
was, that's kind of where she got her start, right? Because was it Leah Thompson or
yeah,
the
Leah Thomas, yeah, yeah,
Thomas, yeah, Thomas. So that's where she got her start was all of that. So, I wonder though, Brian. So, two big things here. One big thing is it goes back to fundamental human motivations and fundamental bureaucratic motivations of money. Right. So
yeah.
at the end of the day, well, why did they change? Did they all of a sudden have an epiphany? Did they all of a sudden realize we've been treating women badly? Oh, we listened to Gavin Newsom in his podcast, and yeah, it's unfair. So we're going to make all these things because it's the right thing to do. Nah, it's money. It's all back to money and the federal government withholding money because they're not compliant with Title IX. The second question about that is, what happens if the world collapses and Kamala Harris is the next president? And this is all reversed. It's all reversed. Then what
Yep.
happens? Do they send out new letters of apology to all the men, believe they're women? So does that happen next? I mean, so are we now in a situation where from administration to administration, excuse me, the this whole dance has to take place. There's no, Title IX is actually a part of law, right? It's actually
Right.
it's a part
Yeah,
of
like
law.
1976 or 1974, somewhere in there, they
Right.
made it the law. Yeah.
And so does the law change every potentially 4 years in that dramatic a fashion? It points out the I mean, there's so many things here. It points out it's the money, and it points out that reinterpreting every law that we have from one administration to the next is a losing proposition. That's not it. It then
So are you making the case for kings? Because we just had no King's Day. So are you making the case for a king where we have consistency for 13-year reigns and 27-year
Well,
reigns and
there are people that think that we should become a monarchy. So we'll reverse George Washington's. They wanted to make him the king, right? They wanted to make him King
yeah,
Washington, but he
yeah.
wasn't having any of that. The third thing that occurs to me to sort of wrap that thought is that Congress is derelict in their duty. Congress should define this thing about the law that they wrote and say this is what it means for all time, so that this president doesn't change it to that president, doesn't change it to that. I mean, you can't run a country like this where the
Right,
fundamental
but who would have to
definition
get a
changes.
bridge in what county in which state for a law like that to be able to get passed through?
Yeah, well, and therefore, it all wraps back to our common theme. It's not going to change until the whole thing blows up. It's
Yeah.
just not.
Yeah. Interesting that you're talking about Congress and kings and things like that. Yesterday, and I'll come back to the UPenn thing here in a second, but yesterday, JD Vance cast the deciding vote for the
Yes.
Senate for the what's being called the one big beautiful bill,
Bill.
which it irks me to have to call it that, but that's what it's called. So that's the legal term for the bill. So but it still just kind of drives me crazy to have to call it that, but whatever. And I was thinking as I was watching that, again, I heard about that. We just had this No King's Day thing, like 2 weeks ago or something like that.
Right.
I'm like, he's got to be the worst king of all time if you have to bring your vice president to cast the deciding vote 51-50 in the Senate to get your thing passed. I assume most kings and dictatorships don't have that kind of dilemma. like things pass 99-0 or 89-1 or
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, in dictatorships, it's always a landslide election for the dictator, right?
Right. Yeah. I think Putin's won by 95+% like the last 6 elections or whatever it is. And Kim Jong-un, I'm going to guess he wins by a pretty good margin.
Yeah,
each
exactly.
time. Anyhow, so going back to your point of the lunacy of this back and forth and things like that, it also reminds me of like when you and I first started doing this podcast, we talked about during the Iranian Revolution, there was a point in 1979 where a mother put the noose over her son's head to be hanged for treason against the new the Ayatollah regime, whatever that regime is called.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of like how we as people get so locked into our ideology that we lose sight of other things. And this screams to me as a great example, because if it weren't for feminism, we wouldn't have had Title IX, which I think Title IX is a fantastic thing. I'm all for it.
Yeah.
And that ideology taken too far now, ironically, excludes women from the privacy and the rights to compete and all the things that it set out to do, because the ideology went too far, in my opinion. Listen, if there's enough trans athletes, have a trans athlete division. I'd like let them compete. I'm all for it. I'm not trying to keep anybody from playing basketball or volleyball or whatever or swimming or whatever they want to do. But why can't we have a place just for women to compete against people who are similarly structured in a molecular level and all muscle density level and bone density level and all these things? Why shouldn't it be that? It seems crazy to me that there's an argument that they shouldn't have this thing, which again, like going back to the suffrage movement in the 1919 or 19 teens or whatever, like women deserve these rights. Why? How could we get so caught up in our own delusion that we decide to take away those very things that we spent 100 years fighting for?
Well, it really comes back, it seems to me, to if you ever have that discussion with somebody, and I have with trans activists. I've been in places and had that discussion, and they'll stop you and they say, no, trans women are women. Trans women are women. You're making a distinction where none exists. That's what they'll say. That's what we'll be told.
Yeah.
So it comes back, and so the idea of, okay, well, why don't we have a trans league, for instance, or or specific events? Well, because that misses the entire point of the entire movement. The entire point of the entire movement is to erase distinctions, and to a great extent, I think you're going to extrapolate out that it's an attack on religion, because it's a notion that we can be not who we were designed to be, not who our biology says we are, not anything else other than what we choose to be. We can be the gods of our own life, even if it contradicts biology and science.
Yeah.
And then the other part of that is our fascination in America with trying not to anybody who's downtrodden can't be, or who has a tougher time in life, cannot be offended. So I don't go around offending people on purpose. I mean, maybe I do from time to time if I'm somebody, I say something somebody doesn't like, but I try not to. The idea that if you can't use any physical reality to define another person's reality, you have to accept their reality, and otherwise it's offensive. Well, that is a problem.
Yeah, it's the whole thing is just a wild thing to notice from my perspective. Just again, whatever side you're on of the argument, it seems like a pretty interesting thing to watch for sure.
Right. Yeah, and will it change? And will it change? The big thing I want to know is, will it change the next go around, whoever the president is?
Well, I think that is the, well, you correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding of the big beautiful bill is that we're doing this big thing to get us along to the point where we can start addressing more specific acute issues like that. That's my understanding. Now, I don't know if that's actually how it's going to play out. Who knows? But I think that's the thesis is we get this big thing taken care of. Now we can start codifying the things that Doge found in this kind of stuff. I mean, midterms are going to be right around the corner, and people are going to be distracted by that. And historically, I don't hold out a lot of hope. That's for sure.
No.
But
I think that's the intention, and I think that's a number of people, because there's all sorts of weird stuff in there. I mean, there's pork barrel stuff and all that. And so the question is whether or not they will actually get around to, we're going to do this one last big bill, and then we'll get around to actually governing the way that the founders thought we should govern. Well, that belies how we've been doing things for a very long time, for decades. It also belies kind of how President Trump likes to do things. He likes to do things that have a big splash,
Yeah.
So is he going to be all that interested in passing or in putting his support by and promoting, individual line item bills through Congress? I kind of don't think so, because he's got to keep the headlines going. That's his way.
I mean, I can envision a world where 14 months from now, you and I are talking about the bigger, more beautiful bill. I can imagine that world.
Well, sure, absolutely.
Well, okay, so we covered the. I think the thing that it's hard for me to articulate in a way that really carries the gravity I think it should, is what a tectonic shift this is to get this kind of decision from UPenn specifically,
right?
And schools like that, for them to have to bend the knee because of finances. There's no question about it, or lawsuits against individuals. The DOJ probably was threatening lawsuits against the school, whatever. Well, you went to Evergreen State. What do they call the people who run the school? The chancellors and stuff like that.
The dean.
All the people with these fancy titles would have been likely personally held accountable for that stuff, and it's not a risk they want to take.
Right.
So, okay, alongside of this happening, there was a poll that came out this week where they polled people, Republicans, Democrats, and independents. And the question was, are you proud to be an American? Now, across the board, I think the response was 58% said yes. But when you broke it down by party, I don't remember the independent number, but the Republican number was 92% yes. The Democrat number was 36% yes.
Right.
All right. So then you and I talked a week or two ago about Mamdani he's going to be the Democrat guy on the ticket, and he's all about social housing, like getting rid of public or private housing and all that kind of stuff. And if we become a socialist country in 70 years, Kenny G, the guy we're talking to, is going to think you and I are dopes for even being upset about this. But if that doesn't happen, he's going to wonder what kept you guys out of the fight? How could you let it get this far? Right?
Oh yeah.
So and here's before we get to the main topic of the division in the country of patriotism and stuff like that. Here's something I find baffling about that particular instance with that guy. My understanding is he's been in the country for 7 years.
Right.
And my understanding is that he's very outspoken about being a socialist / communist. Now he calls it something else, but the
democratic socialist
programs he touts are communist / socialist in nature. Okay.
Yeah.
How is it that we live in a world where a guy can be in any country for 7 years and come in and want to radically change how that country operates, instead of a guy coming in and assimilating to our values, our way of life, the way we want things to be? I cannot wrap my head around that, Dave. I cannot wrap my head around how not only does a guy like that even make it as a plumber or a accountant, but to run the largest city in the country. That is absolutely mind-blowing to me.
2 words: TikTok.
Yeah,
No, I mean
okay.
seriously. So what does this guy got? What has he got? That other people don't. What does he have, for instance, that Cuomo, who the handsy governor, handsy
Yeah.
former
Well,
governor,
I guess over Cuomo, he's got youth. Well, I guess he's got two things. He's got youth, and he didn't try to kill a bunch of old people in nursing homes when COVID happened.
yeah, and he's not, he doesn't fall under Me Too. So there's those
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
But at the end of the day, he is great on video. He's a
Yep.
good-looking guy. He's a young guy. He
Charismatic. You
hates
can't argue that.
he hates Trump. I mean, so
Yep.
boom, he's the guy if he hates Trump, right? So he checks all the TikTok boxes. And so who is it who's interested in voting for him? It's all the young Democrats who, are responding to, who get their news from TikTok. That's where they get their, and TikTok is just it's a stand-in for Instagram and, all the social media, YouTube, whatever. So it doesn't matter if it's TikTok or another platform, but
Yeah.
he's media perfect. It's the same reason. Now this is an unfair comparison, but it's the same kind of sort of motivation about all those people who were excited about, or who are excited about, and fans of the guy that killed the
UNH guy.
United
Yeah.
Healthcare.
United Healthcare.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, same thing. Good looking guy, well spoken, presents well on TV, hates the right people. This is the platform. This is the platform now. And of course, he's going to reverse unfairness. He's going to make housing better in New York. He's going to open a bunch of New York-based or government-owned New York grocery stores. So he's going to make food better. He's going to solve the housing affordability crisis. He doesn't like the Jews, so we can't. I like everybody, but I'm not going to condemn, globalize the Intifada. What's the Intifada? It's going to kill mostly Jews, and then everybody else who likes the Jews. So you put all those things, and he's a perfect media creation for the group of people that loves him. Now, the fact that he didn't follow the American dream, that he's from someplace else, most people probably couldn't.
Never had a meaningful job, like he was a rapper, and he worked as some kind of accounting assistant or something like that for his mom's company, or I'm probably getting the details on that wrong, but he had some kind of job-ish, not really a job
like. But
yeah.
but that's it. He's a media. He is a complete media package. Now, if he's a bald guy like you and I.
Here's my question. I agree with everything you're saying. We live in an age where TikTok and that kind of video virality like that dominates. I'm not questioning that. How can we be in a place where people do not hold firm to their idea of what their country should be? Meaning, the poll we're going to get into, 36% of Democrats are not happy to be, they're not patriotic. They're not proud to be Americans, I think is the way they framed the question. Why wouldn't those people just go where they would be happy? And why wouldn't this guy just stay at a place that's already socialist and become the socialist dictator there? Why? I guess this is the paradox of having a free society, is that we allow this kind of thing, and even to a degree embrace it. I'm not saying we shouldn't embrace it. I think we should embrace alternative ideas, but not to the point where we disrupt what the country is about and arguably what has made the company great. Whether you think it's the greatest country ever or not.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you should or shouldn't, but it's certainly better than most places that have ever been in history.
Sure. Well, it's also, I mean, to take it one step further, you look at China at the end of the Qing dynasty and the youth uprising and the Maoists and the struggle sessions. Whenever there's any unfairness anywhere, people are willing to overlook all the positive things you have. Now, not that the Qing dynasty or China in the early 1900s was a paradise. It wasn't obviously anywhere near as good as we have here. But over and over, look at the pre-Russian Revolution. If you can, and especially it's true in countries where you can pick a central devil. So if you pick the Romanov family in Russia before their revolution, if you pick the Chinese emperors going back, if you pick any one of those things and say, well, they're bad people, the spot in your life where you're at is much worse off because of these bad people. Join us and we're going to overthrow the bad people because, Brian, your life's going to get better. You're going to have more money, more food. Fairness is going to be
they
gone.
they're dangling the right kind of euphoria, which is my life gets better without any effort on my part,
Yes. Yeah.
and we always want what we don't have, which you and I have been
Yep.
talking about since the very first episode we
Right.
did this podcast. Like there's basic fundamental human drivers, and one of them
Exactly.
is whatever I have now is I want something different.
Right. Grass is always greener.
And we always want the path of least resistance by
Yeah.
and large. There's exceptions. There's a handful of like a small, I don't know, 3% exception that is willing to like endure the discomfort to reach personal achievement or financial
Sure.
goals or whatever. But by and large, we're a lot that, if I can take the easier path and I
Sure.
get more, then why wouldn't I?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's the same way. You take a look at any of them, the revolving door of South American dictatorships. We've got unfairness and fairness. We're going to bring in new people. It's going to be fair. Now, the new people come in, they're corrupt, just like the old people. What's the song from the Who just came to mind? The party on the left is now the party on the right. All of the things that we thought we were fighting for, now we just got a new dictator in place. So it's the human story that plays that over and over and over again. And the interesting thing about it is that we live in right now the absolutely most prosperous place and most prosperous time, the most comfortable time. Yes, I realize, I can open my window right here and point to some homeless people that are walking down the street talking to the air. So yeah, there's problems. There's never, but we live in all of that, and even with all of that, we can still say, but the place sucks.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the, and I agree with all the things you're saying. Like this is arguably the most prosperous time human beings as a cohort have ever been able to live.
Exactly.
And I would say that's evidenced by a couple things. One is how easy it is to be in the top 1% of anything. So, for example, podcasting. Okay, by the way, you and I didn't celebrate our 100th episode last week, and we've already forgotten 101 this week. So we gotta celebrate 100 episodes. We'll come back to that in a second. But to be in the top 1% of podcasts, you have to publish 21 episodes.
Right.
90% of podcasts they launch and they don't publish episode 4. They publish 3 and they never get to episode 4. 90% of the 10% that publish 4 episodes, 90% of those do not publish episode 21. So to be in the top 1% of podcast publishers, you have to hit 21 episodes.
Yeah.
That is an illustration and of how easy it is to like crush it in this world that we live in now, which is vastly different than it was in 1985, let's say. Yep. The other thing is you can crush it doing anything. There are YouTube channels about there's a kid who makes $20-something million a year opening toys on YouTube videos.
Yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah.
Like whatever your thing is, like you can go crush it at that, and it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to be in the top 1%. So even in that environment, it's too hard.
Yeah.
Again, this is just like we have just become, we're getting lazier and more drugged by the complacency and comfort and euphoria of having to do so little to get so much. I guess part of me is like, well, how could it go any other way? Then we just want more of that. It's like any drug. You just want more and more and more and more. And here's this guy saying, if you just abolish capitalism and get rid of that pesky homeownership, which none of you can afford anyway. So like, that's not even a dream for you, kid. Like just give up that idea.
Yeah.
And we'll have these, collectively owned housing structures. And how awesome is that going to be? Okay. Except for the part where we say, show me a time in history where this hasn't turned into an authoritarian regime.
Right. Well, and this is
it goes really good right up until that point.
And it's, I mean, if you really want for Kenny G, hopefully Plato is still read in 70 years. But so you go back and you read the Utopia, Plato's Utopia, and some people say that was sort of an illustration, in some ways tongue-in-cheek illustration of this principle, but the same principle we're talking about right now. So it doesn't matter when you are in history or how affluent you are, if it was 2,500 years ago or whether it's today, the same human motivation is at play to focus all of our attention, or a significant portion of our attention, on what we don't have instead of what we do have. So it's like, Christmas at the middle class kid's house. He's just opened the 15th present. Is that all? Is there anything more?
I wanted a pony.
Yeah, I wanted a pony. I wanted a castle. So,
I wanted a pony, and I wanted a 75-inch TV to play my video game on. Come on, Dad, what's going on around here?
Exactly.
Look, are you kidding me?
And it is that same principle, just like all the things we talk about. It's that same human nature principle playing out over and over predictably. So maybe in Kenny G's day, it's going to be a different set of things that happen in some fashion or form. Maybe it'll be like, I only have a pass to go to Mars. I really want to go to Jupiter. I really want to be on the next transport out to Alpha Centauri or whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. Whatever you don't have is what you're going to want.
Well, I came to the conclusion while you were talking a couple minutes ago that they will not be listening to Plato in Kenny G's time. And by the way, Kenny G is the fictitious character 70 years in the future that Dave and I are trying to explain what this moment in time is like, as they undoubtedly look back and wonder what the hell is wrong with us. But Dave, I've decided already in just the 2 minutes since you've said this, they will not be listening to Plato.
Okay.
They will be instead listening to Digital Dave. Digital Dave is going to replace Plato as the philosopher of the eras.
Well, I'm gonna put down to say some profound things pretty soon. It's on my schedule, and I'll let you know. Maybe we'll play the most.
And by the way, for those of you listening who don't know who Digital Dave is, Digital Dave is the Dave I'm talking to.
That's right. Jazz hands. Yeah, so I'll put down some profound things, and we'll share them on the website.
If you could start saying profound things like any moment, that would be a good thing. Like,
I'm really working on it. I'm trying to get it. I'm working on it. I'm working on it.
All right. So we've kind of danced around this, and I took us down a very long, windy path. But getting back to the polls, so 36% of Democrats, 92% of Republicans are proud to be, or patriotic about the U.S., or however they frame the question. We have a guy who is now arguably the hardest left, like, big city player who just won. And the only thing I'd push back on what you said earlier about the young kids in TikTok is the demographic that voted the most overwhelming for him were old, rich white people.
Is that right? I thought it was. Yeah. Oh, really? Okay, I didn't know that. Okay, well,
yeah, it was the highest percentage was rich white people.
Okay, well, so bunch of spoiled.
I'm not saying that the kids weren't a big factor. Right. The millennials are now the largest demographic, so they had to be a factor. There's no getting around that. But Hispanic people, Asian people, and rich white people were the ones that voted predominantly for him. Hispanic people and Black people and poor people did not. So. That's the breakdown that I saw. Now, again, who knows what's accurate and who's not, or what's not. But so you have this chasm, these pockets of the country that you and I talk about all the time. You got Southern California, New York, and Chicago, and Austin-ish.
Yeah.
You got like the Eastern Seaboard, like you got the New Hampshires and Vermonts, like they're kind of okay. But so you have these, and then the Pacific Northwest, of course, where you're at,
right.
You have these huge pockets where they're just not in love with what the country is supposed to be or they just have this idea that we're just a bad country and we should be dissolved and start over again. Some version of that. I'm paraphrasing heavily, but then you have guys like me and you're like, yeah, okay, it sucks in a lot of ways, but it's the best we've been able to do as a people. So, or we could not destroy the whole thing and just keep trying to make it better. That would be an option. Like we could give that a whirl, right?
Yeah.
And then you have the folks that don't know we got to burn it down and start over. How can this go any other way, Dave, than the same stuff we saw in the Civil War, the same stuff we saw before Pearl Harbor, where the division of the city folks and the country folks, or the North and the South, or however it breaks down, the haves and have-nots, however you want to look at it, how can it go any other way than a state like New York seceding? And here's what I think that the impetus for that would be. You got New York and California who have these very liberal policies that are very expensive. They eventually run out of money, and the federal government has to be the backstop.
Yeah.
At some point, I imagine either we're going to all get in line with those things until we all run out of money, or the federal government's going to draw a line in the sand and say, if those are your policies, that's how you want it, that's fine. But we're not going to be your financial backstop.
Right.
I think that would be the kind of thing that would lead to like, okay, well, screw you then. If we're in New York and like you're not going to help, we pay all this money to federal taxes, you're not going to give it back to us to fund our progressive policies. What do we need you for? And they're like, just bolt.
Yeah.
how could it go any other way than that, other than a Pearl Harbor-like event?
Yeah, I think those are the two paths, and there is no off ramp other than those two paths, other than some kind of war event, whether external or internal, or some kind of secession event. Now, I think the way, the suddenness of how those things transpire is what's going to determine which one it is. In other words, if it if it just goes on and gets worse and worse and worse and worse, then I can see that sort of secession type of mentality taking hold.
Yep.
If it happened like overnight, well, there's already plenty of landowners and billionaires. I think Bill Ackman says he's going to fund anybody that'll run against. He's a billionaire.
230 million or 280 million to anybody who can beat that guy.
Yeah, who can beat the guy. So, if it happens in an all of a sudden type of thing, that's one thing. But if it happens gradually over time, then yeah, I could see that gradual degradation, just like happened in the South. And then there is a triggering event, of course, like Fort Sumter and
Yep.
Whatever. But I think that's how it ultimately ends up playing out. So the timing of that is very critical as well. So the same thing could have happened in the 1930s and 40s had it not been for Pearl Harbor. It probably would have. We probably would have ended up with that kind of unrest.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in school, it was hardly talked about in the context of what a foothold communism had on the United States political dialogue. That was, I was raised in schools where they said communism is bad, and here's 60 million people that were killed here, and 100 million people that are killed there, and like here's all the reasons it was bad. But what was lost is what a foothold it actually had before World War II, because of the Great Depression, and people were doing dumb things and corruption and all that kind of stuff. So, but that was all lost. But and then at the same time, you have these big cities like New York and LA and Austin and Chicago and Seattle and San Francisco, and these pockets of these big cities where they're very socialistic in how they want to solve problems. At the same time, you have places like Eastern Washington State, Eastern Oregon State, where they're stuck with those big cities and they want to leave those states and join Idaho, for example.
Right.
And so you have all these people who are just pissed off where they're at.
Yeah. It occurs to me that, again, it's going to depend on. So which one makes the leap first? Does Greater Idaho take place first, or does New York as its own thing go first? So whichever one. Where does the anger boil over first is going to be the real question. Now, I think that the most dangerous way that could happen is if we face a financial crisis where we can't fund Social Security, where we can't fund, if you take a 50% cut to Medicare, take a 50% cut to Medicaid, the people are talking every time there's government debates, they talk about, this and this and this. But what if we really can't fund anymore? We're not the world's reserve currency, or we're half of the world's reserve currency.
You can't sell bonds because your credit rating has been downgraded to a B instead of an A minus or whatever.
And in that situation, that's like there's nothing we can do to avoid collapse, and that's when you have those triggering events, I think, potentially happen on the internal side, unless we're saved by a war beforehand.
I think that you're right. I think financial desperation is probably generally going to be the trigger for that kind of thing. Whatever, however that unfolds. But when the people in Eastern Washington, Eastern Oregon, and those kinds of places, Northern California, for example, and rural Southern Illinois and stuff like that, where they can't make their way financially with the burden of the taxes to fund the big city lifestyle, the social housing projects and that kind of stuff. Those aren't free. And when you're doling it out to people who are, what's the word I'm looking for? The highest rate you can pay for labor when you do those government projects, prevailing wage, it has to be prevailing wage stuff, and as these autocracies form, then their brother-in-law starts getting the contract because he started a construction company, and I can trust him, and therefore I don't put it out to bid. Like all these things that are predictable start to happen. Whoever feels the financial pain first, it feels like to me would be the one to move first. So whether that's the small farming or whatever, agricultural stuff in the eastern part of the Washington, Oregon, or the federal government says, no, New York, no, California, we're not backstopping your $43 billion surplus or overrun in debt, and they can't go out and fund that. I think they'll just, whoever comes to that pain point first, or if there's a collective one, the collective one might be the thing that unites us all.
Yeah. Well,
It could be the Pearl Harbor,
It's I mean, to a great extent, it's the Hunger Games. Time to go back and watch the Hunger Games. You got snow in the big city, and you got the districts, and the districts are finally tired of funding the big city and the extravagant lifestyle of these rich fat cats. And there you go. Now we're in the Hunger Games.
Yeah. Well, every week you and I, it seems like it's a carousel of crises. It seems like every week you and I are talking about, well, this week it could be the Middle East that blows up, and this week it could be Russia and Ukraine that blows up, and this week it could be the economic collapse, this week it could be the deep state, and this week it could be states seceding. And
Right.
I again, every time I think there's a front runner, it kind of the deck reshuffles.
Well, and that's why, we can survive one crisis at a time. So we could survive Bay of Pigs. We could survive the Cuban Missile Crisis. We can survive the Vietnam War, the Korean War, any one of these things. When there's one big societal thing happening, we can get through that, right? But the question is, when you have crisis to the left of me, crisis to the right of me, that's a whole nother thing. I mean, it's impossible to predict how it will come out.
Well, and I think this is where the propaganda really plays a factor. When you have, in this case, again, I'm not saying that Trump is the hero coming to save the day. I don't necessarily believe that. I think he's done some good things, and I think that we needed somebody to shake up Washington in a way that only a guy like Trump could. So I appreciate that part. I don't know if I'd want to go have beers with him or whatever, but there's been 10 years of making him, and now capitalism is in the fold, and conservative white Americans are in that. Like there's been 10 years of this concerted effort to create a boogeyman that, if that catastrophic event happens and people can't pay their bills, they can't put food on the table, and they weren't in a position to be able to prepare ahead of time and all these kinds of things, I believe they're going to lash out at the boogeyman they've been told to lash out at.
It could be. I wonder. So the reason I say I'm not sure if that's the case is because, we started off talking about the transing of sports and all that, and when it first started, when the trans movement really started getting really going, I thought, well, this is just kind of a fringe thing. It's going to pass pretty quickly, and I'm not going to pay much attention to it. Well, here we are, 10 years later, and the course has been reversed to a great extent. So the way that these things kind of happen now is the pendulum is swinging in the other direction. So I kind of think that people have reconnected with some common sense ideas, like there's a difference between a man and a woman, and maybe we shouldn't be involved in every foreign war, and there's a bunch of things that people are connecting with now. I think it's going to be, and they used to call it the silent majority, right?
Yeah.
I think when the silent majority goes down the road 10 years and finally says, oh, I guess common sense is back in vogue again. And now you're still going to have, and revolutions and throughout history are always started by 2 or 3 or 4% maximum of the people in the country. So you can still have a revolution starting when 90% of the people don't think it's a good idea. So that could still very well happen. But it also seems to me that the sort of super ultra progressive project has been set back so much in the past, just since Trump was elected, that it'll be difficult for them to snap back, even if somebody wins the next election who's uber progressive.
Yeah, I was just thinking, you remember, I don't know, 25, 30 years ago, the term slippery slope was thrown out a lot, and people would kind of scoff at you, like, that's a slippery slope we're going down there, because it could lead to this dreadful outcome.
Right.
Given where we were, going back to 2005, let's say, on different topics and things like that, and where we're at now, where we had this landmark decision to reinstate women's rights.
Right.
I think it'll be a few decades until somebody can say, can scoff at somebody for warning of a slippery slope.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. And a lot of it comes back to whether people are feeling it inside or expressing it outside.
Yeah.
Because I've probably this entire time, again, picking the trans movement as the kind of the whipping boy for this. Oh, I shouldn't say that, should I? Man, I'll get in lots of trouble.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
The hate mail can
The hate
convince any
speech.
moment.
Yeah, exactly. But if you look at that and people probably all along, lots of people all along felt this is really just weird, but they didn't want to say anything. Once it becomes okay to say something, saying, I kind of think that women should have their own sports, and they look around and everybody else is going, yeah. Then,
or at least nobody's throwing anything at them when they say it.
Right. Yeah. You're not getting canceled. You're not getting your job isn't getting canceled, or they're not, picketing your home or something like that. When that happens, I think it's harder to take people from that sort of solidified common sense position in a very quick period of time. It can be done, but I think it takes a little longer to take them from that position.
I also think that, just looking back 5 years ago when all the it was $6 trillion or $5 trillion thrown into the economy to,
for COVID,
we had collectively the luxury of worrying about those kinds of problems.
Right.
And now as unemployment is ticking up and people, pretty much everybody knows somebody who's been laid off or knows somebody who knows somebody who's been laid off at least. The number of applicants per job now has gone from 0 to, 50 in many cases and things like that. I don't know that we have the luxury in the freedom of finance and the freedom of stress to have the brain capacity to worry about those things anymore. I think in large part, people just feel like, women should have women's sports, and I got bills to pay, and eggs are too expensive. I got other shit to worry about.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, and we've run out of runway. I mean, we're talking financially. We've run out of runway financially. I mean, you're talking, 2034 before Social Security is destined to go bankrupt. And there will be changes before it happens, because we're not going to let it happen. But I don't expect that I'll probably get all that I am due. And I think that's when
spoken like a true evergreen state socialist. What I'm due.
The words
pour around out of you, Dave.
No, I got to push back on that one, because I actually worked for it. I didn't sit and smoke weed and say, "Send me money, please."
All right. Well, before we wrap up, it has been 101 episodes, Dave. Congratulations for enduring my sarcasm and jibes at your evergreen state for 100 episodes. You made it. And I appreciate your wisdom and insights as always, and it's been fun doing this with you. So,
well, I think back to our original conversation. I remember where I was when you called me and said, "Hey, I got this idea." Like, what kind of idea do you have? And I was standing, I was at Fred Meyer in Puyallup, and so a podcast. Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. So I remember that fateful day. I remember when all that happened. This has been a lot of fun.
I was pacing around my living room. I walked about 17 laps around my couch on that conversation. It was always,
well, I was pacing around the parking lot trying to avoid the homeless people that were approaching me with this kind of look in their eyes. This is Washington.
Well, it's been a lot of fun, and I enjoy doing it. If nothing else, in addition to trying to explain to people in future generations what it feels like in this moment, it's been a great outlet for me to get some of the stuff off my chest, and I don't have hardly any arguments on social media anymore. It's been great for that purpose for me.
Glad the catharsis works, and you haven't had to get a prescription to get it.
100%. It's complete cathartic experience every week. I can save these things. I don't have this urge to blurt it out. So in a selfish way, it's helped me a lot maintain my sanity. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
Anyhow, as Dave mentioned,
will look back at us.
What's that?
Hopefully, Kenny G will look back at us with gratefulness in his eyes.
Dave is going to be the next Plato. Of course, he's going to.
I'm working on it.
As Dave mentioned in the beginning, if you think there's something we got especially right or especially wrong, we'd love to hear about that. We're trying to explain to future generations what it's like, and we get your input on that, so it's not just Dave and I's perspective. You can do that at unsilentpodcast.com, or Rumble has a great comment section. And until next week, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.